welcome to this week's episode of Mitch and Brad's Movie Show. This week we have love in the air, not between us, but just in the air in general. We're going to be discussing the movie Licorice Pizza, the new Paul Thomas Anderson movie, and it's just going to be an episode all about love. So how do you feel about that, Mitch?
I think I'm good with it. Obviously, Valentine's Day just passed, so we wanted to do something kind of set it on that. And, Licorice Pizza was a movie that kind of dealt with, young love in a way. It had a lot of other things going for it, and we'll get to that in a little bit here. But yeah, special little Valentine's Day themed episode, if you will.
Valentine's Day mixed with some independent film. I mean, we're really taking a detour from last week's episode, which was big budget action films, now down to more intimate sci-fi films. So why don't we get us kicked off with our opening question, which this week is, what's your favorite romantic comedy? And your choice, it's one of my favorite movies, but I questioned if it was a romantic I guess it is, but why don't you tell us what your choice is and we'll get into it.
Well, if you let me tell the viewers or the listeners about it, maybe I can get to it. So yeah, my favorite romantic comedy, and I did do a little bit of research, kind of look at a lot of movies in this genre and debate whether or not they were rom-coms or whether they were just comedies. So my favorite romantic comedy is Wedding Crashers, because I definitely think that's a rom-com. The central plot line is Owen Wilson's character falling in love with Rachel McAdams' character, and the whole central theme of that movie is love, weddings, it fits, okay? So don't give me any stuff about it not being a rom-com. It is a rom-com, and it is definitely a very good one. You could definitely say this is just a pure good comedy movie at its core, and I would agree with that as well, but I definitely think it qualifies as a rom-com. So I had to think hard about this, but that is definitely my favorite one because it's just so entertaining, so quotable, so funny. It has so much going for it. And since we're both Maryland and DC residents, it was filmed right here in this very land.
How about that? Wedding Crashers is definitely one of my favorite comedies of all time. I guess I just never thought of, when you hear romantic comedy, you think chick flick. Hopefully that's not a banned term anymore, but you think chick flick. So the Wedding Crashers isn't one that immediately popped into my head when I hear romantic comedy. But you made a case for it. I mean, it definitely is a movie all about love. So it's a comedy. It's got romance. It fits the criteria. I mean, and it's hilarious, man. I mean, it's where the phrase, movies that can create phrases that stand the test of time, which this one has. Maryland, crab cakes and football, that's what Maryland does. Maybe it's just if you live in Maryland, but I have heard that phrase more times than I care to repeat, man.
Yeah, if you live outside of Maryland, just to clue you in a little bit, here in Maryland, people live by that quote. Crab cakes and football, that's what Maryland does. And you see that on t-shirts. You hear people just saying it casually on the street. People love that quote, and they really take it to heart.
Yeah, dude. It might be a thing where outside of Maryland, nobody ever hears that phrase or says that phrase. But my God, in Maryland, if I had a nickel every time, I'd be a billionaire. Yeah. It's a great movie. It is a great movie. I think they keep talking about a sequel. Hopefully one day we get I know sequels after a certain amount of time tend to not be good, but one day one of these is going to buck that trend, and I'm hopeful Wedding Crashers will be that one.
No, I think we're way past the window of getting a good Wedding Crashers sequel. Just please let it be. Don't ruin the integrity of the original movie by making a terrible sequel. We've had that happen way too many times. Looking at you, Zoolander 2. But, I really hope we don't get a sequel to Wedding Crashers. Just let it be on its own. Just let it keep living on with its great quotes, great comedy, great memories that people have associated with it. So leave it be, please. To whoever's listening to this, if they have any power in that decision, just leave it alone.
I believe David Dobkin is a fan of ours, and he'll heed your words. That's the director, for those who don't know. Um, so my pick for this one, I didn't even go with my own criteria on this. I just kind of looked at my shelf. I was like, what's a good romantic comedy I could buy? I was like, you know what? I'm going to do a little bit of self-promotion here, because the pick I had is Sydney White with Amanda Bynes. And why did I pick Sydney White? It's the first movie I ever worked on. I'm in it. I'm a background character in the movie. If you look for the big fat blob that walks by him in several scenes, that's this fat guy right here. And I remember working on it when I was in college in Florida, and this was before Amanda Bynes kind of made headlines for not so nice stuff. But I can tell you flat out from working with her, she was insanely nice. Like her trajectory was not seen when I worked with her. There was a group of girls who like stopped her. She was walking to her trailer, like, "Oh my God, Miss Bynes, can we get a picture with you?" And she was so nice. She stopped. She took pictures and everything. And it is a romantic comedy. Sydney White is about it's Sydney White and the Seven Dorks was the original title of the movie when I worked on it, and it's basically it's a Snow White retelling, of seven dorks, and she plays the Snow White to these people. It's actually a pretty funny movie, and if you go back and watch Amanda Bynes movies from back in the day, she was funny, man. She was a really good actor. So have you even seen this movie?
No, I have not, but I know you popped up in it. So for those of us who don't know, where could they look for you in this movie? What scene do you pop up in? How far is it into the movie? Where should they look when you walk into frame? Where are you in this movie?
There's a couple classroom scenes where I'm in there. You'll just look for the guy who looks like he's 30 and doesn't belong in a classroom setting, even though this was 10 years ago. Actually, probably longer. No, yeah, longer than 15 years ago, actually, if I think about it. And then there's a scene where she's outside hammering something into the ground, and walking behind her is, you'll just notice a big fat bald guy walking behind her with glistening earrings in, because back in the day I was pierced. I had this pierced, I had this pierced, I had my tongue pierced. So, it was fun, man. It was the first movie I ever worked on, and it lit my fuse. And since then, I've been lucky enough to work on a lot of big projects, and I'm a member of the SAG-AFTRA. Humble brag. So,
all right. So if you're done shouting yourself out here, maybe we could get back to what we were doing. So, it's a shame you lost the piercings, but that's part of the reason why I like doing this, is that I could get some good movie recommendations from you. So I'm sure my girlfriend would certainly love watching an Amanda Bynes comedy. She really likes her movies, and She's the Man is a classic comedy. I'm not afraid to admit I like that movie. I think it's funny. I think it's classic Amanda Bynes. I think she's funny in it. Does she obviously look like a girl pretending to be a boy in that particular movie? 100%. But I think Amanda Bynes in her movies, I think she's funny. So I'm looking forward to checking this one out. Maybe not tomorrow, but someday soon.
If you dug She's the Man, you'll like Sydney White. It's in the exact same vein.
So our main segment here for this episode, because it is centered around Licorice Pizza, which is definitely an indie movie. So our main segment here today, we're doing a talking pictures segment, and I'll explain what that is here in a second, but we're going to be talking pictures about indie movies themselves. So our main segment here today is talking pictures, where we just have a general open discussion about something, just to take it easy on ourselves a little bit, to just take a little bit of a break. Don't have to do as much research in between episodes. So we're talking pictures here about indie movies. And again, to kind of keep with that low-key theme, because indie movies are, for the most part, kind of low-key, a little bit laid back, not quite as big earth-blowing up stuff as we were talking about last week. So, we're talking pictures here about indie movies. So, Brad, what do you think? Do you like indie movies? How do they make you feel? What do you think about indies?
I'm going to give you a bland answer. I like some indie movies and I hate other ones because some of them are really good that take risks, and some of them are about as boring as can possibly be.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Sometimes you could have an indie movie that you think is like a masterpiece after you see it, and it instantly becomes one of your favorites. You think it's a classic. And then you have indies that are kind of like the plastic bag blowing around in American Beauty, where you say, this is a movie, nothing happened, or it was terrible, or I didn't get it. It just, sure, there are definitely hits and misses in indie movies. I will 100% agree with you on that.
I'm going to have to. Am I to believe you didn't like American Beauty then?
Well, I'll admit I haven't seen it, but I know that part in the movie. Obviously, that's one of the kind of more well-known parts from that, and some people might not even know of American Beauty. That's a movie from the late '90s, kind of our era. But anyway, back to the point here. So, indie movies, yeah, I think you're right. When I hear indie movies, I picture these, small casts. Low budget, trying to make a general point about something, whether it's life or happiness or something small scale. And that's not necessarily what all indie movies are, but that's what I picture when I hear indie movies. When I hear independent movies, I think these small scale movies that just make you feel something, that have these, quiet, intimate casts that just take a little lesson away from.
Yeah, I mean, indie really is a wide breadth of what a movie can be, because an independent film, I think the most successful independent film ever is still, or maybe it's been usurped since then, but it's Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, which we won't get to in the weeds about that, but he did finance the movie himself, and it made like $600 million. So it is an independent film, even though it was a $60 million independent film. And then there's other movies, that are, to go back to the beginning, not even the beginning, but when indie film really took off was early 90s with Richard Linklater's Slacker, Kevin Smith's Clerks, even Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs. That was when indie film was just like, it took off, man. Where like these were filmmakers you had never heard of before, who were coming out making movies that you had never seen before, and most of them relied on dialogue. They weren't big plot expense, SFX driven films. They were just great dialogue. So how do you feel? When did you kind of get into like that level of film, I guess?
Yeah, so I'd say I didn't really kind of start falling in love with indie movies until fairly recently, when I would say that my movie taste maybe improved a little bit from when I was a teenager, when I was just a typical 18 to 22-year-old who just wanted, again, like we were talking about last week, to see stuff blow up. So, I've definitely kind of watched a lot more indie movies in recent years. And that's not to say I didn't watch any when I was younger, but definitely lately, especially as a growing adult and taking on more responsibilities in life, I like these kind of simple, clean, just hopeful movies, small scale stuff that just either want to make you feel something or want to teach you something. And that's when, again, that's what I think of when I hear indie movies. That's not necessarily what they all are, but everyone, it seems, kind of thinks of something different when they hear that. So that's what I think of, and that's what I like in my indie movies these days.
Right. I guess, so what would be some like kind of good examples of indie movies that you've recently seen, or maybe even ones that you were like saw and you were just like, so did a little bit of research on and were like, oh, that wasn't a big studio, man. That was just independently put out.
Sure. So one that I can think of is kind of a textbook example of what I'm talking about, where I generally like to kind of see my indies look and how they feel and things like that, is a movie that I saw a couple of years ago that came back in the 2010s that's called The Spectacular Now. And this was a little film starring Miles Teller and Shailene Woodley, who were just a couple of kids in high school that were going towards graduation that are looking to find their place in the world. And it's very small stakes. It's small scale. It's mostly just the two of them with a couple other people starring in it as well. Small parts by Kyle Chandler and Mary Elizabeth Winstead. But, the object of the movie was just basically the lesson to take away that we're not our parents, or to, really get the most out of your life, or just these little lessons like that just apply to everyday life. And Again, I just like that kind of indie movie that just makes you feel something, that helps you connect with the characters, that, just teaches you a little something by the end of it. And a small part by Brie Larson in that movie, who people these days who say she's a bad actress, I'll use that as another example right alongside Room to say that she isn't. But I'm getting off track here. The Spectacular Now, that's a good example of what I think of when I think of indie movies these days, and what I like to kind of see in that type of subgenre in indie movies.
Yeah, I do. I remember seeing that movie as well. It was kind of this resurgence of like romantic independent films, which had that movie plus Shailene Woodley and Ansel Elgort had done The Fault in Our Stars, and you had Emma Watson doing movies like The Bling Ring, and movies like that were also independently. So there was like a resurgence of these like independent films back in that era, which kind of brought them back to the forefront again, which was a good time for movies, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess another one that, kind of jumps to my mind that kind of reminds me of this subgenre of indie movies, these romantic indie movies, I guess if you want to call them that, is Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist. That was just a delightful little movie that I saw in the mid 2000s when it came out, that I just, again, it's one of these quiet kind of life lesson romantic indie movies that is kind of quirky, or just however it makes you feel. It just, it's just delightful. It makes you feel things, and that's what I think of when I think indie movies. And those are the kind of ones that I like to watch every now and then.
Yeah, they were definitely good. But so would you say, like, we're talking about the movies from the early 90s, like your Clerks and these movies that came out that had no stars. Well, Reservoir Dogs, I guess, had stars, but like they were smaller movies from new directors who you were just getting to know. Whereas independent film now, it does seem like it's almost been taken over by big name actors, like people who are like, oh, I just want to go do my little indie project, this little $900 million independent film that, and it's like, it seems like almost like independent, the title, the name alone has been almost mainstreamed too much.
I guess I would agree with that. I think you're right. I think it's hard these days to find an indie movie that is playing in a lot of theaters that you don't know anyone who's in it, because you'll have at least a couple of people, a couple recognizable names, or a couple big faces that signed on to do it because they read the script and they really liked it and thought it would be a good movie. I think a lot of actors do that these days, where they take a break from blockbusters and big budget movies to kind of stretch their legs and show off their talents as a dramatic actor in a quiet indie movie every now and then. And I think you're right. I think it's hard to really find a truly independent, off the radar movie these days that, again, you can go see in a theater, that you don't have to travel 100 miles to go see in one theater that it's not playing anywhere else. So I think you're right. I think it's a little bit harder to find a true indie movie like we first got, but I don't necessarily hate that, because, again, I think we're still getting some really good ones that are still off the radar movies that are getting mainstream attention because of who's in them or who's directing them or whatever it might be, that they're finally getting the recognition that they deserve.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I can think of several people who I love right now. Like the one who's popping in my head right now is Danny McBride, who, if you watch The Righteous Gemstones or anything on HBO, the guy is absolutely hilarious. But he broke onto the scene, him and his producing writing buddy Jody Hill, with a movie called The Foot Fist Way, which I don't know if you ever saw that movie. It is hilarious. It is about a strip mall karate instructor, and it is dark. It is hilarious, and that was my first introduction to Danny McBride, was this dark movie. And fun fact, it's the first movie I ever saw in theaters where I was the only one in the theater, because I guess not a lot of people had known about it. I don't even remember how I heard about it, but I went and saw it. And so you do get these independent movies. They do introduce you to a whole new world of stuff, because Danny McBride's comedy for me is up there. I absolutely love Danny McBride, and to go back and watch The Foot Fist Way, which if you're a fan, I definitely recommend doing. So was there any kind of artist that you love? I'm leading you here because I know the answer to my question, But is there any artist that you love who has come on the scene recently that you are that was an independent producer and maybe has a big movie coming out soon?
I know what you're trying to get me to say, and the answer is yes, but it doesn't matter what it is these days. If I see a movie like this, and we'll talk more about this in a second, if it's coming out from A24, which maybe you might have some mixed feelings on, but I would say if I see a movie these days that's advertised by A24, that was produced by them, if it's coming out of that company, that I tend to pay attention to a little bit more, because they've been really killing it lately with these, off the beaten path movies that, for the most part, have somebody recognizable in them, but some of them have completely unknown casts. But these really offbeat, not typical blockbuster movies that they've come out with. And I think whenever they come out with something new, and they have a couple coming out this year that I have my eye on, but I think them specifically, A24 as a picture company, whatever you want to call it, I think when they have something that comes out, I definitely pay attention to it, even if it doesn't really have someone attached that I really know.
Right on, right on. I was leading him to try and talk about Robert Eggers. He did not take the bait on that one, but we'll talk about Robert Eggers in the future. He's a phenomenal filmmaker. So A24 is kind of the company right now. They're a mini major, I think is what you would call them, which is they are a big company, but they're not your Paramount, they're not your Universal or whatever. They fund lower budgets, and I did do a little research on this, and I looked at their production budgets for the movies they've made, and I think the highest one was a shade under $10 million. And in today's world, $10 million, not a lot of money. And they remind me of back in the day. I don't even think they're still a company, but Artisan. Artisan was the company that put out a lot of these independent films. I mean, they made their name with Blair Witch. That was like their big movie that made them the ton of money. And so, every couple of years, every 5 years or whatever, these mini majors like A24, Artisan pop up that fund smaller projects.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely a good thing, because it introduces people to a different side of certain genres that they just gotten used to the big name stuff with, whether it's indie horror or romantic indies or indie comedies, or all these subgenres of independent movies that show off some different actors, that show off some different subgenres. So whether it's a studio is kind of getting a little bit bigger, or the most that they spend on a movie is $10 million, I still think it's great exposure for the genres, for the actors, for the filmmakers that aren't exactly household names yet. So I'm all for companies like this that keep making great independent pictures that keep coming out in theaters. So I'm absolutely looking forward to the future of this kind of stuff, and just really exposing myself to some different things that come out in the theaters. So I'm very much looking forward to what A24 does, and other studios like them, or even the big studios that take a risk on a smaller movie that try to do something like that. So I'm always all for checking something like this out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think Blumhouse is another good kind of horror independent type thing. I mean, he doesn't just do horror. Jason Blum, I believe is his name. He was nominated for Best Picture. He was the producer on Whiplash, Damien Chazelle's Whiplash. So he's known for his horror movies, but he definitely steps out, and when he does, gets nominated for Oscars. And that's another kind of route independent films can take, which is short films like Whiplash. Whiplash was a short film that was turned into a feature film for a moderate budget, and now Damien Chazelle, one of the biggest directors working today.
Absolutely. So you never know where these things can lead to. So I highly encourage people to check out, if they haven't heard of a movie, or if they see it's coming out by a independent movie themed kind of studio, that they would definitely give movies like that a shot, to really expose themselves to different things and different genres and people. So if you're, kind of done talking about indies, and I think I've kind of exhausted here as well, why don't we get into an indie movie itself in Licorice Pizza that, came out recently, that we both have some feelings about. So, here to wrap up this episode, we're doing our new movie review as usual, but we're definitely looking at something different than we've looked at so far in our other episodes. And that's the movie Licorice Pizza. And this was definitely an interesting one because if you couldn't tell from the rest of the episode, this was definitely an indie movie in its look and feel. And it definitely made me, at least, feel some things. So, again, like we usually do, we'll give just a quick, thumbs up, thumbs down, just talk about it a little bit, give you a chance to click away if you don't want to be spoiled, if you want to watch the movie and come back later. So, Brad, what'd you think of it? Because I definitely thought it was solid. I liked it. It kind of stays with you. You definitely have to digest it, but I like that about it. So, Brad, what did you think of it?
I agree. I loved it. I thought I'd put it in the top 10 of 2021 for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, because, this was, again, one of these ones where it kind of releases a little bit ago that maybe you haven't even heard of until just now. So it seems like it's a current, this week movie, but it's already been out for a little bit. And that was definitely the case for me, too, where, I knew kind of this movie's existence, but didn't really know that much about it. So when we decided to center this episode around it, I actually went to go see it and find out a little bit more because, again, when we talked about in a previous episode, we like to just watch kind of one trailer to get the gist of a movie and then go see it instead of really watching every single clip there is out there. So this was definitely one of those ones for me. And I think, this more than other ones, it's better to go in with no expectations, not low expectations, because there's a difference. But I think going in, not really expecting anything, I think is a good way to watch this one specifically.
Yeah, and there's certain filmmakers that they make a movie and it comes out, and then you have to wait like a year or maybe even 2 years before you hear they're working on their next movie. And so I remember after Phantom Thread came out, which was Paul Thomas Anderson's last movie, you were like, well, what's his next? What's he going to tackle next? And it came out that his next movie was going to be a coming of age story set in 1970s Hollywood or whatever. And you're like, oh, okay, I like that. I like that idea. And then came out, it's Licorice Pizza, man. And it's just, I enjoy Paul Thomas Anderson movies. And I like that this one was a straightforward movie. It reminded me of his other romantic comedy he did back in the day, Punch Drunk Love, which is, a simple concept, just done really well, and even a simple concept from Paul Thomas Anderson has these beats in it that are like that can only be done by Paul Thomas Anderson. Quirky beats, which this movie had a lot of.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Licorice Pizza, where it was simple yet it was complicated, and that may not make sense to somebody who hasn't seen it yet, but I think hopefully that kind of reaches people who have, and they kind of nod and go, yeah, it was simple but complicated. And I think that would definitely describe this one. And to kind of explain the title a little bit, because it is definitely a little odd. When I first kind of saw a trailer for this movie, I thought, Licorice Pizza, what does that mean? Is that literal? Or is someone just putting licorice on their pizza and that's going to be a thing in the movie? So Paul Thomas Anderson, the director, basically, he took the two things that really reminded him of his childhood, which was licorice and pizza, and just put them together as the title for the movie because, again, he wanted to make a very nostalgic coming-of-age movie set in the 1970s to really just connect with people and make them feel those things when they were a kid, whether they grew up in that era or a different one, or, and I like that. I like that little fun fact about the title.
I did. I saw that too. And I also saw another reason for Licorice Pizza was because apparently that is what they would call LP albums back in the 70s. Licorice Pizzas. And so I was like, oh, okay. Because I'll be honest, when the movie ended, I was still like, why was this movie called Licorice Pizza? So you had to go look it up. And I saw the fact about the licorice in the pizza, but then like I kept reading and stuff, and it might be a made up fact. Who knows? I don't think it is, but it was it was said because this movie does involve, records, and it has a little bit of that type feeling in it. And it was that back in the 70s, they called, vinyl there's the word, vinyl records, LPs, Licorice Pizzas. So I thought that's interesting. I like those little things where you're just like, oh, that's an interesting fact.
Yeah, that was a fun fact about this movie. So, getting into the movie itself, I mean, what did you think? What did you feel? What did you think about the characters? Let's deep dive into it. If you hadn't noticed, we're starting to talk spoilers a little bit. Well, now we are. So what did you think about this? Because, this was one of those movies where you really care about the characters. And, again, it's a really simple story, but, it doesn't drag. It doesn't feel too random. It keeps you captivated, but it doesn't really kind of do anything huge or spectacular or earth shattering. It's just a small little story that just holds your attention.
Yeah, I think I like movies like this that they're, what are they called, coming of age stories, where nothing major happens. There's no huge plot point that you're relying on. It's just simply a young person or a person of any age coming of age, coming into themselves or whatever. And I think the acting in this movie was Alana Hayam. I wasn't super familiar with her band before this, but I thought as a first time actress, she knocked it out of the park.
I thought, of course, you have your two leads, and she was one of them, and she did a fantastic job. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if she was talked about for an Oscar for Best Actress or what have you. So I think this is a very nostalgic coming of age movie, and I think that's definitely going to help her maybe get a nomination, because Hollywood really likes the nostalgia factor in a lot of the movies that they nominate. But talk about the male lead as well. Gary Valentine, who is played by Cooper Hoffman, who, again, going with the fun fact theme, I did not know was the son of the late Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah, he was solid too, and I am harder on people who come from a famous lineage, because it's Ralph Garman, a great podcaster who does a podcast with Kevin Smith, said he says sometimes people act like they hit a triple even though they were born on third base, which means they act like they accomplished something when really they had it handed to them. So I am a tougher judge of character on famous lineage, nepotism, essentially. And he's good. He is good. I can see this dude having a solid career, because he didn't come across as not deserving to be in the movie. And I guess if you come from a family where Philip Seymour Hoffman's your father, you're going to pick up some solid acting tips.
No, you're right. I mean, it's hard to really judge his acting ability if you know who he's related to, but I still think, again, if you're going in with fresh eyes and you don't really know that he's Philip Seymour Hoffman's son, that he does a really good job. And I'm not sure if you could really put him in the Oscar conversation alongside Alana Kane or Haim or whatever her name was in the movie versus real life. It's very confusing, but yeah, I think he did definitely do a good job. And, he really kind of reminded me of me a little bit. He's just that kid that's learning about life and just going along in high school and just growing up. And I think there's a little bit of something there for everyone to be reminded of themselves, reflected in this character and in the female lead as well. So for me, it really evoked that coming of age, that time in your life feeling, and feeling some of these things that the characters feel and going through some of these milestones. And it did kind of make me feel nostalgic watching it.
Yeah. And I fully agree. I am a judgmental prick when it comes to that stuff. It's not something I should do when it comes to judging a last name of somebody, but I don't think I'm alone in that fact. And I think that's why this movie can also, to go back to why we qualify this as a new movie release, even though it did release a little while ago, is because it's picking up steam right now because of the awards that are coming out. It was recently nominated for a SAG Award. Bradley Cooper's performance was nominated for the SAG Award. As I mentioned earlier, I am lucky enough to be a voting member of the SAG-AFTRA People Board, whatever you want to call it, awards. And so that's how I got to watch this movie, was I got a screener of it through them. And when it comes to his performance in the movie, it was good, but he was in it for not that long. I'll be honest, he's not going to get my vote. I think Bradley Cooper is a very excellent actor, but I didn't think that it's not going to be the one I think that's going to get him the Oscar. Solid performance, not award worthy for my taste, for my liking.
Yeah, besides, if you're a fan of Bradley Cooper and you want to see him win an award this year, I mean, you got Nightmare Alley as well that he was in, that maybe he could win something for that because, I agree with you. He was good in this, but he was only in it for about 5-10 minutes of screen time. And I agree, he was good, not great. I think he did a good job because I think Bradley Cooper is a good actor, but I don't really see him winning any awards for this. And if he does, as usual, I'd kind of question the Academy's decisions about who wins and who doesn't everybody? But yeah, he was good in this too. And that's probably one of the few names casual movie fans might know going into Licorice Pizza is Bradley Cooper, because there weren't really a lot of big names in this one to go around.
Exactly, and I'll tell you, I'm voting for Ben Affleck for Tender Bar, but that's besides the point. But another big name in the movie, which kind of goes to the movie, and a little bit of the movie did jump around a lot for me, which became slightly hard to follow at certain points, which was we start the movie and Gary Valentine, Cooper Hoffman's character, he's a movie extra, I guess. And then he's working on a new venture, and then he's a waterbed salesman, and it all just kind of was just like, wait, was he an actor? And then why is he here? And then wait, now he's working with Sean Penn, or Alana Kane is working with Sean Penn, but he's also, so there was a little bit of like, there were a couple points in this movie where I was just like, wait, how did we get here? But I guess in the grand scheme, the story was about the relationship between Kane and Valentine, and whether or not you fully followed every aspect of the movie, you still enjoyed it as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. It was a little kind of random feeling at times, but I think that just kind of goes along with the indie movie look and feel. And you're right, the center thing that you're supposed to pay attention to is the relationship between the two leads, which is Cooper Hoffman and Alana Haim. So, I think that, yeah, that stood out by itself, and that was what you should be paying attention to. And, the story is just kind of like a plot device to just kind of keep these two together and to have them interacting in new and different ways and, kind of pushing the relationship forward. So, yeah, the story was a little bit random, but, I guess I wasn't really paying attention to it that much because, again, what they really wanted people to see was the relationship at the core of the movie. And I think they definitely did a good job of that, for sure.
Without a doubt. And I do have to say, I don't know if you had a favorite scene in the movie that stuck out to you, but for me, there's a scene in the movie that it really has no plot point, or it has a plot point, but it's the scene where the box truck runs out of gas and he just films it rolling back on the hill with Alana having to drive the thing. I don't know why. It wasn't like a big scene or anything, but I absolutely loved the way that was filmed because it was just filmed great. The sound design of the truck, the out of gas truck just rolling down the hill, I absolutely love that scene. And so after the movie was over, I went back and looked up on it and everything, and it was like, oh wow, that wasn't a stunt driver or anything. They had Alana Haim actually doing the driving of that box truck just rolling down the hill. It was almost like a scene out of a comedy, but done slightly more serious, like not done for laughs, but it was still funny, and it was just a great scene.
Yeah, good for her. Watching that, I was kind of on the edge of my seat thinking, oh God, what bad thing is going to happen? Her driving down this hill backwards and doing all these turns. I'm like, when is something going to hit the fan? And it's just, thankfully it didn't. It was just kind of like another one of these magnifying glasses, a look at the relationship between the two leads, about how they deal with different situations and why they almost kind of need each other. You kind of get that feeling throughout this movie that they just they go together, they complement each other on different things, they keep each other grounded, they just work together well. And I think that was just another one of those scenes that just kind of showed that off and showed why they were a really good pairing in the movie. But another thing I think definitely stood out about Licorice Pizza was the setting, because I thought that they really nailed this time period. Sometimes when you see these movies, and it really seems like when it takes place in the past, that a movie like this is really trying to just cash in on just the nostalgia factor, that they're not really trying that hard to get everything from the time period right, that they're just trying to make people feel nostalgic, or they're just trying to go for a different look and feel than present day. But I thought Licorice Pizza, this was something that, of course, they had to get right to make it a good and believable movie, but that wasn't really the focus of the movie, to nail the time period in the 70s. But I thought that was something that they absolutely got great, that they really did a great job on.
Yeah, I agree. And again, after the movie ended, I look at all that, and I didn't know Paul Thomas Anderson was born in the Valley, or in LA at that time. So I think you can obviously tell he had a fondness for that era, because that was his youth. That was him as a child, was LA in the 70s. And so you can definitely, there are certain movies, like you said, who just go for the nostalgia feel. And there are certain movies that go for the, I don't care what you think, this reminds me of my youth. And you definitely got that feel from this one for Paul Thomas Anderson.
I think you're right. I think this was just a movie that the director made that just said, you know what? I don't really care if this does great at the box office, or if it does or doesn't win awards. Like, sure, that'd be great, but I'm just going to make a movie that makes me feel great on the inside, that makes me feel nostalgic, that, is going to hopefully hit home with some people who watch it. And I think that's what makes it good, is that when you're not trying too hard, when you just go out to make a great movie that is a personal story for you as the director, that you have a good movie like this that is a result because of it. And I think he really did a great job, that this is something that I could see myself going back and watching again, and just maybe feeling some of those feelings that I was when I saw this the first time, to just, kind of take you back to that time in your life, or that, whole will they, won't they, of like people that you, maybe hope or wish that you had a relationship with when you were that age. So I think this is a very nostalgic, yet still very talently made movie, if that's a word, use it whatever. But I think it's a very good movie that I think is definitely rewatchable, and that definitely hopefully hits home for a lot more people out there.
Without a doubt. And to kind of tie it all together with our whole indie movie vibe and romantic vibe of this episode, which was, this movie was released in the end of 2021 during the pandemic, obviously. And it was released to the best independent opening of any film during the pandemic. So in almost 2 years, I believe, with $335,000 from only 4 theaters, which isn't just phenomenal numbers for pandemic era. That's phenomenal numbers for any movie opening up. 4 theaters, $335,000. So independent film is still alive and well, man. It just goes to show you, if you put out a good product, people will go to the theaters to see it.
So thank you to everybody for watching, listening to another episode of Mitch and Brad's Movie Show. We were happy to have you, and happy to talk about this little movie, Licorice Pizza. So we're going to be, as is our theme, shifting gears again next week. And yes, we will get to American Underdog, which is a Kurt Warner biopic. And if you don't know who that is, well, tune in next week and you'll find out, or go watch the movie. So, we will get to it for people who have maybe been clamoring a little bit, because we did kind of allude to that we were going to cover it after a previous episode, but kind of rearrange the order a little bit. We just live life on the edge like that. So, Brad, what are you looking forward to about next week? We're talking football, we're talking sports movies, we're talking American Underdog. What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, man, sports and movies, kind of 2 of my favorite topics. So it should be a really good episode for us.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. So until then, hopefully we'll see you again next week. But thanks to everybody for tuning in with us on another episode of Mitch and Brad's Movie Show. And we will see you again next week with a new episode.
Bye.